I'm very excited to share the story from this week's guest. We learn how to operate a very successful basement unit house hack. We learn how to soundproof pretty much everything because if somebody's living below you, you want to be soundproofed. And why Verbo just might be the better bet over Airbnb if you're doing short-term rentals in your house hack. Let's get going. Welcome, guys, back to the Property Squad. I am still very excited. I know I said that last time, but it's still exciting. This is still a lot of fun, and I've gotten a lot of really good feedback, and I love helping people, especially get started. This is a real estate podcast about investing, stories, and strategy. Each week, I interview someone who has had investing success, their trials, their lessons, their story. In the next episode, I do break down their strategy, dive deeper into it using my own knowledge and expertise. I pick one or two things that I feel we could dive straight down into so that you can start taking action. My name is Anson Young. I've been an investor and agent for over 17 years, and I'm doing fix and flips, wholesales, and BRRRR deals in 4 different markets. I'm also a BiggerPockets author, a speaker, and probably one of the only non-employees to own one of these, which I don't think I'm supposed to have it, but here we are. And if you're listening, it's a BiggerPockets reservation parking sign that came from their old building. So anyways, the Property Squad operates in seasons, and each season we do tackle a different aspect of real estate investing. So if you aren't into house hacking, stay tuned for the next season. If you don't know, house hacking is where you buy a property to live in, 1 to 4 units, and you live in one part of the property and you rent out the rest. A room, the other side of your duplex, the garage, you get it. With the renters paying for some or all of your mortgage. To be honest, there's almost no better way to get started off in real estate investing, building a portfolio, or if you're just into financial independence and you want to get a head start in your life, have your first house be a house hack, your second house, your third house. It doesn't matter. This right here is a story episode. So let's get in, talk to Dan Mackin right now. Welcome in, everybody, to the Property Squad. With us today is the awesome Dan Mackin. Dan, how are you doing today, bud?
Doing well.
And I know that we know each other pretty well, but not everybody else outside of this sphere knows us. So at least inside of Denver and meetups and stuff. But can you give us kind of the 60-second rundown of who Dan is and what you do?
Yeah, my name's Dan Mackin, as mentioned. I work in Denver as a real estate agent, specifically helping house hackers and some flippers. And have been doing that for the past 8 years. I've grown up most of my life in the Denver area. Currently run a house hack myself and have some other projects going there too. And run the meetup with Anson around the whole Front Range of Colorado.
That's right. And you're actually like our third agent in a row. So, so I think we need to probably move away from just agents, but it is interesting to know that, everybody who we've talked to so far has been, over 30, kids, married, different stages of those things, but they're older and they're still making house hacking working. So, which is awesome. I think, house hacking being as powerful as it is, having somebody like you still implementing it and you're helping other house hackers, you're basically just showing like, hey, I can do it, you could do it too. So that's that's awesome. So what kind of like inspired you to get started with house hacking? When's like the first time you heard about it, and then what made you think, yeah, I want to do this, like as a married guy with kids?
Well, the first joke I would want to put in here is I was doing house hacking before it was a term.
Okay.
I started, my first house hack was the first property my wife and I bought 12 years ago at this point.
Okay.
All I knew was, you had some extra space, you could rent it out. It was kind of the basic thing, right? Just now it's a term that we in the industry like to use and have as a thing to categorize what's happening. As far as doing it, as a older adult, I mean, I'm in my mid 30s now, and doing it with family, it was more a bit of out of necessity. Colorado is not cheap to live in. And especially nowadays with where interest rates are at. But even when we bought, our mortgage payment was going to be in the mid to high twos, as far as 2000s, just for reference for some places. And it's just something where, like, could we pay that? Yes, it was me and my wife, we both work, so we could make that payment, but it's if you can use part of your space to cut that down and it doesn't kill you to do it, because I think still that's the biggest piece in this is everyone's like, "Oh, you do it, you just put up with whatever." I don't wanna put up with anything. I've got a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old. When we moved into the current place, they were 2 and 6. Um, Nobody wants to deal with that with their kids and having all that, like, you're not trying to make concessions here. And so, yeah, just the idea had to line up of being something that we could do sustainably for a long time, and trying to look at it from a different way of I'm not living on somebody's couch or, all the other typical things of what a hack would look like for most people who get into it.
Yeah, give us a brief description of of how you're running your house hack. Obviously, you're not running like an Airbnb bedroom down the hall from your master bedroom or something like that. But
No.
how is your setup? And then we'll get to how you got it to there here in a bit. But how is your setup?
So mine is, well, I own a 2-story home with a walkout basement, so technically like 3 stories if you want to look at it that way. And the main 2 stories is a 4-bed, 2.5 bath. So plenty of space for me and my family. It's about 2,300 square feet, 2,400. It's, decent size, pretty good size, honestly. And then the house, it has a 800 square foot, fully separate basement apartment that is accessed from the walkout basement. So you go around the side of the house, down the side, down a ramp, and they have their own porch and everything on the bottom and their own private entrance.
That's ideal when you have kids and dog and all that all that
Yes.
fun stuff, right? So like we'll start at the beginning of this house. So how did you go about finding this house, and what did that process look like for you? Obviously, you're an agent. I'm sure that that had something to do with it, but if it didn't, we'd like to know that too.
Yeah. So the agent part actually has nothing to do with this. What had happened was, as you have kids, as you get more settled in your life, you usually kind of have certain things you're not willing to give up. And what it was for us is the neighborhood that we lived in. We had kind of just fallen in love with. It was a nice balance between being kind of the cheap neighborhood and also not being the super high end HOA neighborhood where everybody wants to drive Range Rovers and has to keep up with each other. So it was this nice like kind of balance in between. And within that, we're like, all right, we want to stay in this neighborhood. I don't. We were in a townhome at the time, and I was like, I don't want to pay the full mortgage if we're going to go to a house. I want to be able to do this and stay manageably within a price point that we're already at. Our mortgage payment on the townhome was $1,200 a month. Like, why would you ever want to leave that? Like, that's it's we technically, like, had we outgrown it, we were on the verge of doing that, but we could have done it through, until our girls were at least in middle school, getting to high school and it started to be problematic. So for us, it was a thing of more, if we're gonna move, it has to make sense. But we only have one neighborhood we're gonna stay in, and there's only 220 homes in the whole neighborhood outside, like excluding the townhomes. And so what it had narrowed down to was we had decided to add even more criteria on top of that of like, all right, we have to stay in these homes. And then during the garage sales that our neighborhood would do, I would go ride around with my daughter, my oldest, because garage sale day is her second favorite holiday of the year. And we would go riding around, and there was one street in specific that specifically the neighbors all seemed to know each other. And that is one thing I've missed from growing up was, when my family first moved to Colorado when I was young, in one of our first houses, we were on a cul-de-sac, and every Tuesday and Thursday, the whole street would come out. We'd all play street hockey together. They'd hang out in people's garages. Like, it was this own little community that it had. And we just didn't have that anymore. Growing up, we didn't have that after we moved from that street. And where we had currently lived at the townhome, my neighbors were nice. Like, I had no issues with them, but nobody hung out.
Yeah.
And so I was like, if we're gonna move, I want it to be a place that I'm gonna move and I want to stay. Um, so we literally narrowed it down to 4 houses in the entire neighborhood, because they had to have the walkout basement because I knew I was going to build a basement apartment of some sort, and it had to be on that street. And there are more walkouts as you keep going down, but just based on that and being close enough to where street parking wasn't going to be a problem, because that's, I think, still one piece within house hacking people don't consider is the amount of parking you actually have. So there was 4 houses we could choose from, and it was literally like if one of these four houses comes up for sale, we're going to buy it. I have no idea what they look like inside. I have no idea in any of that, but they fit the criteria on the basics, and we're going to go from there.
That's pretty nuts. So you obviously one of these four houses came up for sale. Um, was it something that you had a flag or a search, or you were just searching every week, or how did that? What did that look like for you?
Um, I'm trying to remember. So I didn't have a search set up because we actually weren't planning on moving. Because it's like if 4 out of 200 something homes are your option, you're not planning on anything happening. So we had actually just refinanced our townhome. We'd had some debt things come up from some weird things in life, and I had to refinance the townhome to help take care of that instead of being on credit cards. And like literally a month and a half after we did that, and had the conversation of we are going to stay here for at least 6 more years, like just because of how things changed. It was like we're here for 6 years. We just refinanced. That's what we're doing. Conveniently, the best option came on the market. And I didn't see the listing specifically. I was what was it happening? I was walking by. There was something. I was taking a walk. I was going somewhere. I was riding my bike. And I just remember seeing a sign. I was like, What is that?" And I go over and I see the sign. I was like, "Huh.
Oh,
Oh." And it was coming soon. Like it wasn't on just yet. Um, so I went home and asked my wife, uh, just hey, what's going on or whatever. Or I was like, hey, one of the four houses is up, and she goes, you told me we were staying here, and I was like, I'm just saying. Like one of the four that we had talked about is up. She goes, do you know what it looks like? I was like, no clue. But we're gonna go see it. I don't even know if the basement's finished. I have no idea. It's just one of the four. Um, and so went and talked to the owner, like specifically went over. He already had it listed. So me being an agent had very little to do with this.
sure.
So I just went over and he knew who I was. And so I just went and was like, hey, I want to, you guys are for sale. Like, can we check it out? And they said, sure. And they showed us around. They're very nice folks, but the place was styled old people fashioned is the way I'd put it, where they picked oak for everything. So it's got oak trim, it's got oak cabinets, it's tan everywhere. But they're original owners. It was built in 2002. And so we're walking around. My wife's immediately like, I don't like any of these finishes. I don't like any of this. But I'm looking at it more of what it would be for a hack. And I kind of looked around. I was like, you know what? We could make this work. And so my favorite statement of the whole thing was as we're leaving, the sellers, he's like, hey, so do you got a buyer? And I was like, yeah, me. And he immediately just went, fuck. Because he knew if he had done it with me directly or talked to me, he would have saved himself $15,000 to $20,000.
Oh,
Um, so, but we ended up going for it and starting to make it happen.
that's wow. So yeah, that's extremely unique because usually people look at this from like a hybrid, or usually it's like skewed on the investor side. They go, if I have to live here for a year or two and just suffer through it, fine, because the numbers work and I need a place to live. And you're going about it the opposite way. You're like I am targeting this area, these four specific houses because of the neighborhood, because of all the family reasons and all of the important reasons to you. So that's a huge, you like turn the whole model on its head, where most of the house hackers that I've worked with, and I'm sure a lot of the ones that you do, they're kind of like, if I have to live here for a year or two, that's great, but I know I'm going to move on to the next thing. And you're thinking of it more of a longevity. You guys, your kids will go to school and in middle school and high school there, and who knows what after that. But you had that longevity in mind, which is cool. And so it comes time to pay for the house. So what did your financing look like?
So the financing was 5% down on a conventional loan. We made too much to do 3% or any of the other ones that were there. And I'm personally just not a huge fan of FHA. So
Mm.
we almost always go the conventional route. So it's 5% down. We had a really high credit score at that point for some reason, even though when we refinanced all of our credit card debt, we went from like a high 600 to an 830 on our credit. Like it jumped insanely high.
Nice.
That had nothing to do with me being smart. That was just conveniently how it worked out. And so because of that, we ended up with 5% down. The purchase price was $490 for reference. And our PMI, because our interest rate or because our credit score was so high, was only like $93 a month. So that's one point I always like to make to people is if you go conventional versus FHA, the conventional PMI, the mortgage insurance, is going to be based on your credit score. where FHA, it's more of a fixed cost for most cases. And so because we had such a crazy good credit score, we had less than $100 month mortgage insurance on a loan that we had 95% loan to value on.
That's pretty crazy. So 5% down and with a good credit score, less than $100 in that dreaded PMI that
Mhm.
everybody's like complaining about. But would you pay $100 more a month if you could put 15% less down? And I
Yes.
think most people would say, yeah, absolutely. Because I'm sure you had plans for that extra 15%. But before we get to kind of how you got to the basement and finished it out, what did you do to analyze the property before you bought it on its potential on the house hack side? What did you have kind of a strategy in mind, or you just knew like, hey, I'm going to fix the basement and maybe do XYZ? Or did you analyze, look at comps in your area, which you're a little bit outside of Denver in a smaller town surrounded by fields, which I don't know what that's like, but uh so it's not, it's not traditional suburbia. It's kind
Mm-mm.
of a little bit out there. So what did you do to analyze it, and how did you decide on, I guess the method that you went with?
Yeah. And for reference, our town at the time was about 18 to 20,000 people. And this was 4 years ago. As of today, we're probably at 25,000. Um, the method I used on this was different than what I would use for a normal house hack. But I think it was because this one was much more of an emotional, long term family decision. So it wasn't something based on the fact of, oh, this is going to cover my entire mortgage. This is going to be whatever. I literally looked at it as my calculation was very simple, saying my current mortgage is this, which after the refinance was 1,800. So originally we were at that 1,200. We are at 1,800 now.
On your townhome?
On the townhome, yes.
Okay.
So I truly, my calculation in this move was I'm paying 1,800 now. If I move to this new house and I do the work I want to do, can I have double the space, a 2-car garage, and be on a street we want to be on and pay the same or less than we're currently paying? The answer was yes, even if we did long term rents.
That kind of makes an easy decision. Was there any like, well, was there any tools or anything that you used to analyze what you would get for those rental amounts, especially on kind of a unique area where there's probably not a lot of comparables when it comes to either short term, midterm, or long term rental of a basement unit type thing?
No, that's the fun part about doing this in areas like mine. Is as we continue this story, you'll find out that the data is minimal, as far as what you can get, and so I truly had to look at rents just based on looking around at what people were getting for 2-bedroom condos and other things like that, because there are no comps for basement apartments in my area. So I had to be like, all right, if a 2-bedroom apartment is going for 1,600 on the low end up to 2 grand, kind of in that price point, like, all right, if I can get uh even if I got $1,000, our mortgage was going to be 2,550, somewhere in that range. And so I was like, all right, I need to make up $750 in rent. I can make that off of a basement apartment that's like got private entry and all this stuff in its own deck. Like, that was a very easy thing to kind of just in a very baseline, like, all right, my worst case is I need to make $750. Um, I'd pay $750 to live in my basement. Like, that's the bargain of the day. Um, so that was, I think that's been the most difficult part with this, is usually you can look at calculations based on, all right, here's a bunch of rent comparables, here's all these different things. When with a lot of these hacks, especially if you're not in a very populated area like a big metro or something else, the comps just aren't there. You truly have to just go in and say, all right, here's what apartments would go for. We're giving less because we don't have the amenities, but it's a little more privacy. It's your own apartment. You kind of put those things together and say, all right, like, what I would even put it as, if I need to make $750 a month, what can you even get for $750 a month? Guess what? All of my room hackers who were just renting out bedrooms, that's what they were getting for a bedroom in almost every part of town. Like, didn't
Yeah.
matter if they were in my city, if they were in Denver, wherever. Like, I was like, all right, I need to get bedroom rents for an entire apartment to break the barrier that I want to break. So it's a no question answer.
Yeah. That's a good place to be. And yeah, that's exactly how you should do it. In my area would be the same thing. There's zero basement apartments, so I'd have to go off of a 2 bed apartment rental or something like that, and kind of just figure it out from there. Which Sounds like it's working. Let's talk about, so you buy the house, and if I remember right, I think your basement was unfinished at the time, right?
Correct. Yep.
So
So it's
fully
total.
unfinished,
Yeah, it's a
wh-
1,200 square foot unfinished basement.
which is great because you have a blank canvas, right?
Yep.
Um, walk us through what you did in the basement. And I know that you went through some extra precautions since you live upstairs,
Mhm.
so that you don't have to hear the people downstairs and vice versa. So can you walk us through a little bit of that?
Yes. So originally, like right after we moved in, within a month or two, I started framing out. It'd been a while since I'd done framing, and I like having some skills. Would I do it again? No, but at least now I know kind of where issues can lie. Um, so we started at the end of 2019 framing everything out. Then we all know what happened beginning of 2020. So I kind of hoarded cash for a little bit just because none of us knew where our jobs were going and what the market was going to do. And then finally got fired back up at the end of 2021.
Okay.
So just business went crazy. I didn't have the mental capacity or time to do it. It was one of those of like, I can put time into this, or I can just make more money and just keep paying the extra mortgage and not worry about it for now. So that's what I did. End of 2021, I pulled a HELOC on the house because values had gone up and that helped, and started lined up a contractor that I had met and been using a little bit on some other projects, and got him to come in and start building it out. So what we decided on for our specific situation was our town restricts ADU units, so accessory dwelling units, to 800 square feet. Well, we'll keep it simple because the rules are a little convoluted, but we'll just say 800 square feet is the limit of the size of an ADU you can build. Um, it's not required to be an ADU. They have weird that's the part of the benefit of being in a place that's still figuring out how to be a municipality, is their code and their laws generally conflict with each other in really weird ways. If you're in some place like Denver or a big city, they've been doing this for, centuries. And so they've been figuring out what they're doing. Um Ours, the only difference between an ADU and a not ADU was pretty much nothing. And to me, having an ADU actually comes with more rules. So that's one piece I like to point out to people, is like a basement apartment that's permitted and allowed to be there, but it's not classified as an ADU, may actually be a better option than one with an ADU. Because if they change laws about like, oh, you can only do this with your ADU or you can only do this with it, I don't want to be a part of that. So what we did is we built it at 800 square feet just in case. If we found that down the road it makes sense to get it classified as an ADU, we can do that, because we built it out to be able to fit into the mold that the city has laid out. And within the square footage we had, again, we had 1,200 square feet to use. Figure 100 square feet of that would have to be for utility room, just based on where it was. But we could use up to 1,100 square feet for this apartment. We kept it at 8, specifically so that we could make a really nice 1 bedroom instead of a really weird 2 bedroom. And I think that is one big piece that I'm really picky on. I think a lot of people look at bedroom count versus functionality of a space. And I want somebody to walk in and everything makes sense where it is. I don't want to be like, well, there's this weird room over there we don't really know what to do with, and blah blah blah. It's just like, I want you to walk in and be like, this is awesome. Like everything's where it should be. Like it all flows nicely. There's no questions. So we stuck with that. So we have a nice big 1 bedroom, like I said, 800 square feet, full kitchen, full laundry. It has its own sub panel, so they have their own electric there. We also put in a full mini split system for the basement as well, so it has its own air system. Again, when we're talking about longevity, this is a big part of it, for sound reasons. So they have their own mini splits. There's 2 heads down there, one in the bedroom, one in the main living area. And then we also put in tankless water
Hmm.
heat. And so that, because I've got 3 girls, I got a wife and 2 daughters, and so they're, as far as like shower use and other things like that, I don't need a guest or tenant or whoever's staying down there to have issues with hot water running out. And so our hot water tank was coming up on 20 years old already. And so the fact that it had survived that long was great, but we knew it was on its last leg. And so it was a difference of, I could have gotten it replaced for 1,400, where tankless cost 3,500. So I spent the extra $2,100, but that means I don't ever have to worry about hot water running out. We have a huge bathtub for some reason. And so which would drain our entire water heater before. Now I can make that bath as hot as I want and know that whoever's downstairs can still shower and not have to worry about it. So getting kind of into what we did to fully separate the space, though, like I said, the first was mini splits. We have forced air in our house. We don't have a boiler, and so you have all the ducting running through your house. And ducting is a great thing to translate sound. The sound goes in, it just bounces across, comes out the other vent, and you're just going to have voices coming through wherever. So by doing a mini split for the basement, that fully removed that portion of the sound travel. The next piece we have is the ceiling. The ceiling's the next place that's going to come through if it's a basement apartment. And so our ceiling is actually a normal ceiling, just half inch with maybe some fiberglass insulation tucked in there and call it good. Our ceiling is actually fiberglass insulation and then what's called resilient channel, which if you ever look it up online, you'll find it pretty quick. So you do resilient channel, and then we have 5/8 inch drywall instead of half inch. The reason you want to do 5/8 is 5/8 has fiberglass in it as well, where half inch does not. So if you ever pick up a sheet of half inch and then you pick up a sheet of 5/8, the 5/8 is so much heavier because obviously thickness, but it has fiberglass in it too.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have fiberglass, then a special glue, and then another sheet of 5/8, and then the texture on top of that. And so our ceiling went from a half inch thick to at this point we probably reduced the ceiling height by 1.5 inches compared to what it would have been. But now we have heard voices maybe twice in the year and a half we've been running it. And that's
That's
through a weak spot and how we built one section that we did a little bit wrong.
oh,
So
interesting. So it's your fault, is what you're
it
saying.
is my fault. Yeah.
And no, like footsteps are obviously not a huge issue for the people in the basement.
Um, that is the one piece I would say that still comes through. So, in my research on this over the past couple of years, since I have to help a lot of clients figure this out too, it's called footfall. That's the term that like industry people like to use. Footfall noise is almost impossible to get rid of. It's basically impacts. Those are
Yeah.
the hardest thing. Just frequency wise, those low frequencies they vibrate through the whole house, and so they're basically impossible to get rid of. Are they better that with that extra insulation and the drywall and all that? Yes, but will you ever get fully rid of them? No, and I can go into what we've even like further down the story, we've added some extra pieces, and I can tell you about that later of what we did to even try to improve that more.
No, I
Down
mean,
the road.
let's we're talking about construction now and how to separate that unit. Obviously, there's no way to completely sound isolate it unless you
Mhm.
do some like recording studio level stuff, or pour concrete or something. But
Yep.
what so later on you found out a way to kind of help out your situation with the sound. How did you do that?
Yes. So what we realized just in terms of planning is putting the way the way the floor plans worked out, it ended up being that 3 bedrooms had to be stacked on top of each other for this to make sense. Like just in the way the floor plan would make the most sense. And so we ended up with the basement bedroom. I have a main floor master, which is literally like mirrored right above it. And then
Mm.
my youngest daughter's bedroom is right above ours. And so we had this stack of 3 bedrooms right on top of each other. And the issue we had is in the master bedroom downstairs, or in just the main bedroom for the apartment, is where some of the ducting for upstairs runs through. So we have a soffit that comes down right above the bed, and that's where the least amount of insulation is conveniently. Um, and so, we only have one sheet of 5/8 drywall there, and there's just ducting in between. So any noise that goes into our ducts in our bedroom then would bounce through those and then just come through the one sheet of 5/8. So, my wife and I, after a night of, being adults, uh, kind of had a moment of like, like I, she didn't care, but I didn't. I had this feeling, and I think this is one of the biggest pieces of house hacking of it's you don't want to inconvenience yourself for your tenant's sake. Like, especially on a long-term one like this. You want to be like, I'm in my house. I want to make this as comfortable for myself as possible and barely even think about the people that are staying here. Like,
Right.
I want to be barely aware they're even here. And so what we did as a test, because that footfall noise, because it's such a problem, I was like, you know what? Let's see if we build the floor up in one room what that will change. So the rest of the main floor is all wood floors and everything else, and I'm not going to change that. That's going to entitle like ripping up the kitchen, all kinds of stuff. It's not worth it. But we had this 12 by 17 master bedroom, that was a perfect space to say, like, let's see if we can make this. Let's see what happens if we make sound insulation go up versus down. So we're
Oh,
not doing the ceiling; we're doing the floor instead. So what we originally had in there was just carpet. So we had a wool padding because wool padding can help with some of the sound better, and then carpet. What we did now instead is it's actually the regular subfloor
okay.
and then a 1/4 inch rubber mat that looks kind of like the mat you would have at like a playground, like that rubber stuff they put on playgrounds now.
Sure, sure.
So you actually do the subfloor, you do carpet glue. So you literally just get the carpet glue they would use for commercial purposes. They just trowel it on, they roll the mat out, and then they do more carpet glue, and they do another layer of subfloor, and then more carpet glue, another layer of subfloor, and then they do padding and carpet. So my floor went from the standard, like pretty thin, like
Yeah.
subfloor padding carpet, to now it's 3 layers of subfloor plus some foam plus carpet on top of it. Um, and you can now yell into the floor. Um, like directly have your face at the carpet and scream into the carpet. And downstairs, before you would be very aware of what was being said or whatever. Where now it's one of those where you kind of have that moment where you have to pause and you be like, I heard something. Like it's still there, but it's so faint and really not apparent that you don't really know what's happening. Um, in that test, though, the footfall noise. So it got rid of the voices, which was our biggest problem there. The footfall noise. The one thing we've learned from it was only way to get rid of footfall noise as much as possible is soft materials. Um, so get the thickest carpet, get the thickest padding. Like if you're worried about footfall noise because you're over a bedroom with a baby in it or something else in one of these, the thicker and the softer, the better. That's all we can do.
Yeah, so now that you're like a materials expert on soundproofing a house hack, what's your consulting website? No.
Yeah.
So I mean that is very interesting because not a lot of people would think to go up off of the subfloor. Um, or even, obviously you've lived in the house hack and multiple house hacks, but yeah, there is a peace of mind of like, I don't want to have to worry about, the people downstairs and if they can hear the kids running, the voices, or any other things that you do in your normal daily adult life, like you're talking about, of course. You may not want that to translate through both ways, right? So you don't want to
Hmm.
hear from them. They don't want to hear from you. So okay, so you have this basement unit. It's it's ultra soundproof now, but well, what is the strategy that you guys are using down there to house hack? So we flirted with it a little bit, but what is the actual strategy that you're using, and how is it working out so far?
Yeah. So for ours, I look at long term rent as the final option for a house hack, just in terms of like having somebody there full time gives you the least flexibility. And one of the best benefits of having a basement apartment is when people come to town, they can stay with you without being with you, if that makes sense. Like you'd be like, hey, like we can have dinner, we can hang out, but I can tell you to go away when I need you to go away. Um, so what we did is we decided we were going to try short term to start. Um, Partially because I wanted to pay this unit off as fast as possible. And that was going to be best achieved through short term rentals. Um, as we talked about before, getting comps for this and figuring out what it was going to be worth and all of that, nearly impossible. AirDNA or all those others would be trying to do their thing. Now I got my cat here standing right in front of everything.
Right.
The numbers were just unknown. But we're like, if we're gonna furnish a place, we can still fall back to midterm. There he
Oh,
goes. There
cat.
goes the tail. Cat pulling the thing over this tail. Um, with a short term and a midterm, the only difference is how long you're renting it. And so we're like, well, if we're gonna fully furnish it and short term doesn't work, we know we could still probably get that 30 to 50% more in rent for a midterm, for what it is compared to a long term rental.
Sure.
So we started with short term. Based on what I was guessing, I was shooting for about 130 to 150 a night. And generally, occupancy in Colorado, you can hit 70% in most places as far as occupancy rates go. So I was figuring we'd come out of this whole thing with give or take a 3-year payback on the entire cost of the unit, which we haven't gone over those full costs yet. But um, the other strategy I specifically used, because I like trying to be as niche as possible. It's always worked in every business I've run. And so my niche on this was a little bit different than what most people would do, which was it wasn't like, hey, I have a nice unit. It was, hey, I have a very nice unit. Like nobody has complained about this place because we put so much effort into it. But I don't want to be on Airbnb with everybody else.
Okay.
If you look around, even in my town, Airbnb still has a decent chunk of listings. Guess what? Nobody uses VRBO. And so, yes, the mantra would also be that, well, no guests are on VRBO either. But I would rather be a big fish in a small pond versus a small fish in a big pond. And so, what we did is we threw it only on VRBO. We're still only on VRBO. And when you search our area, we are in the top 3 listings every single time.
Nice. That's very niche because you're not competing with those Airbnb folks. There are a certain type of person who only likes VRBO. Um, Nothing wrong with that at all. They just prefer it, or it's older, or whatever it is. Um, that's great. So did you hit those metrics that you thought? 150 a night, 130, 150 a night, 70% occupancy? Have you been hitting that?
Yes, so we hit in certain months, yes.
Okay.
So the way I can remember the numbers as far as what we looked at last was for the year, I was hoping to hit 30 to 33,000 in income from the unit. We ended up hitting about 24,000. But this was literally only being on VRBO and during the winter months. Generally from I would say mid-November, actually we'll say beginning of November through mid-March when spring break started, we had so little occupancy during that period because nobody's coming to Colorado to go hang out in the Front Range. They're either going to go to Denver or they're going skiing. That's the only two things they're doing.
Right.
And so our occupancy rate during that time fell off a cliff. But again, those other months propped it up. So we still made 24,000. And I'm pretty sure that was net actually. After basically out of 7 to 8 months of the year. And so for me to maximize those last few months, we're just going to do midterm this round. So starting in January this year, we're going to just have midterm for 3 months, and that should make up another 6 grand or so on our numbers that we want to put in there. So we'll get closer to that 30K mark this year,
Okay.
just from that alone.
And then after those 3 months, then you'll go back to short term. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yep.
Nice. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, you're hitting most of your goals with that, and then you're figuring out ways to actually hit them with winter here
Yeah.
is kind of rough all the way around. And nobody wants to be like, yeah, on the Front Range or in suburbia in the middle of winter. That's not
No.
all that exciting. Okay. um, so yeah, so why don't we just go through the numbers on, you pulled out the HELOC to pay for the construction of the unit. Um, and you're hoping to have it paid off in 3 years. What is that amount that you put into it?
So total amount with furnishings and everything else came out to about 110.
Okay.
Um, we could have done it if we, had gone cheaper on a few things and kind of cut it back a little bit. We probably could have done it for closer to 90 all in, and saved about 20 grand on that. But those extra pieces are honestly what made the difference. There was a few things that cost a bit extra that I just wish didn't, but I couldn't change it. Like, I have a nicer couch in my basement than my couch in my basement costs more than all my other couches combined. Um, but it's just because if you're somebody that likes color, which I am, try finding a not gray couch that is also a pull out that also fits 4 people. That we ended up having a custom order come from North Carolina. So we have a $3,800 couch in our basement. But it's what we had to do. So there's little things like that were a bit over budget just with what they were.
Sure.
But what ended up, as far as like how it broke down, it was about, what did it come to? It was like 95 to 100, somewhere in there for the actual cost of the build. But that in that build, for reference for people, that was for a new electrical panel, which didn't have to happen. It did
Okay.
because we were doing a couple other things. We had a new electrical panel, new water heater, sub panel for the basement, full separate air system. Part of that was also putting an electric car charger at the same time because we were doing the panel.
Right.
The extra drywall, nicer cabinets, full laundry. So we have new appliances for the whole basement. And then I think about 7,500 to 10 grand, somewhere in that range, is just in landscaping.
Oh,
Because we
wow.
had to add some concrete up front to make it to where the guests could not like walk into our cars and like have to like scoot by our cars to get to the backyard, and then building out the whole side yard ramp so that it's on the north side of our house at
Oof,
a
yeah,
13-degree slope. And so you couldn't just put some dirt down or gravel and call it good. We had to
right.
be a little more diligent about that.
Yeah, no, that's very detailed because and you benefited from a lot of those things too. I mean, you benefited from the electric car charger and the the brand new electrical panel and the hot water heater where you can fill up your, Olympic sized bathtub. Um all of those things, right? So it wasn't all, just, all for them kind of thing. Like you
No.
guys benefit too, which is awesome. So yeah, 110, 800 square feet, a really nice one bedroom with bulletproof soundproofing, extra landscaping, and a place to plug in your electric car, which is highly important for most house hackers.
Yes.
No, so okay, so how would you say that house hacking has really like impacted your life in this project and on your road to financial independence?
So, I mean, even with the little headaches that it's had, I found that it gives me a bit more fulfillment in the things we're doing. Um, a big part of this and for me in this process has been the pride of actually supplying good housing. I think I look at this a little differently than some folks of like, I want you to be happy with what I'm giving you. We've sold off a bunch of properties over the past couple years, and it's because they weren't ones that I wanted to be in charge of in terms of being like, I want to be able to supply something that people aren't going to complain about, at least things that are within my control, right? I want to be able like, no, here's a really nice house to live in, here's a really nice apartment, whatever it is. Um, and so even for my wife, because that's a big question in this, has been like, spouses are the hardest part of house hacking, especially if they're spouses plus kids,
Right.
is she went from the fear of who's going to be in our basement to within that first week, her questions flipped from who's in our house to do they like it?
Oh,
Like it flipped over to the other side because she wanted to be proud of what we'd put together as well. And so, with that path towards financial independence, like what I will admit, for now, while the loan's still being paid off that we put into this, it doesn't feel that much more independent yet, right? Like it's this thing of like, oh, the debt's still there, it will get paid off. But 3 to 4 years down the road, we're gonna have almost no mortgage payment every month, for where we are, which for our area is insane.
right. Yeah.
Everybody around us, our average price point for a house in our area now is like $700,000-800,000, and so to be somebody who bought within the past 5 years and also have no mortgage payment compared to like our next door neighbors, their mortgage payment's probably the same as our townhouse was. They're probably like $1,300-1,400, but it's because they bought in like 2013,
Right.
when nobody wanted to live up here, and so for us, like that's just gonna be a big piece, and it's what I have found in this is it doesn't have to be as hard as most people make it out to be. And I kind of already knew that to some extent, but it's all about planning. Um, Part of the reason we only made 24,000 in that first bit and we didn't have as high of occupancy was because I wanted to see how little work I could do once the unit was up and running and what it would make. I think a lot of people are like, I have software and I'm putting this in and I'm getting it to where it adjusts the rates automatically every day and it's changing this and it's changing that. I wanted to be as hands off as possible and see what it did. So I think after the unit was up and running, I would say the first month is where you're still figuring stuff out. But once we kind of got the system in place, as far as like, here's the cleaner, here's how we message her, here's how we do this stuff, um, I probably have a total of 15 hours into that over the year.
That's pretty impressive for something that you thought was just going to subsidize your mortgage by a bit just to make it to that townhome payment to now it has the potential to pay for almost all of your mortgage. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like, our mortgage now, obviously, we've had some tax increases over the past couple of years because values went up, I can't say much about that, and it's Colorado, and we keep having hail, so our insurance costs are going through the roof, but, even with that, if I hit the 30K mark, that will cover 90 to 95% of my mortgage for the year, um, off a basement of people that I barely know are there, that added 100 like, I put 100 into the basement, like, an actual costs for the
Right.
build, it added 150 to 175 to actual value in my house. So I got equity on top of it. Um, and like I barely have to touch it. And so like, if it was something where it's like, yeah, I'm managing it every day, I'm doing all these crazy things, sure. Like that's a consideration to have. But like I wanted to kind of prove that like you can not be lazy, right? But if you put effort in up front, that's the biggest difference here is we put a lot of planning in during the build and the furnishing so that when it was running, the least amount of problems would come up.
Yeah.
Um, the only problem we found we can't completely avoid is people in their 60s and 70s who don't know how to use email. That we had a couple people who haven't gotten the welcome emails about like, hey, here's how to check in and here's your code and a few things like that. But that's only out of the 50 something guests we had in the first year, that happened like twice. And so we learned from those little things.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, sounds like it's exceeding expectations, which is
Mhm.
amazing. Um, can you share what's kind of the most valuable lessons that you've learned from this house hack? And then I'll have a follow-up question right after that. But what are the most valuable lessons that you've, learned from this entire process? And it's been a process.
Um, First lesson, like early on in the process, was actually calculating how much you are going to save by doing the work yourself.
Mm,
So to pay our GC, like if we were ignoring the panel and all the other things that we did, all those kind of tertiary things we added, the actual finish of the basement was about 70 grand. Um, I could have done the work or GC'd a bunch of it myself and gone that, and I would have saved maybe 20 to 25,000 all in. That would have taken me a year and a half to 2 years to do. You know how much my basement made me in the first year? 20 to 25,000. Um, so first that my first lesson was look, and this is what I had to tell myself was, if you pay somebody to do it, it's going to hurt financially at the moment to do it, but how quickly will that difference pay itself back, just in terms of the finances, but also in terms of the fact that I'm not down in the basement working on something. I'm able to hang out with my kids, make my business better, whatever else it may be. So that was lesson number one. Lesson number two was about the cleaners. Um,
mm,
so the first, we have cleaners that come to our house every couple weeks because my wife and I both work weird schedules, and I absolutely despise cleaning my house. And they can crank it out an hour and a half. It'll take us 5 hours, and we'll both hate each other by the end of it. So we were using them at first, and they did a fine job as far as the cleaning goes. But my wife is very particular about how things are laid out, how they look, all of that. She's very particular on that. Um, and so we were just finding that they wouldn't put stuff where we needed it or wouldn't stock things the way we wanted. And so what we did instead is one of the neighbors up the street. I said, "Yeah, I'm looking for another cleaner. I'm just trying to figure out somebody in the neighborhood." Just talking to one of the neighbors, and they said, "Oh, Michelle, our neighbor next door, she does cleaning. You should talk to her." So I talked to Michelle. Um, she has been doing it since like the first month was the people we'd used before. Since then, so for the past 15 months, we've used Michelle. She lives 10 doors up the street. So when she has to come over, she doesn't have to like drive an hour to get here and do everything. Like she can pop out of her house, start the laundry, go do some errands, do whatever she wants, come back, continue the cleaning. Like for her, it's just part of her daily routine when the cleanings happen most of the time. And what has happened with that is because it's in her neighborhood, she wants to represent her neighborhood how she sees it. And so she thoroughly cleans the place when she like we haven't had to pay a handyman to touch up anything because she goes, "Hey, can I do the touch up paint or can I do these things?" Like cuz she has access to all those materials in our storage room. I'm just like, "Yeah, it's we pay her $30 an hour and she just takes care of all that." I haven't had to touch the paint. I haven't had to do anything. Like she has taken care of all of it and she just gets a flat rate per hour. Like we pay her a flat rate per cleaning just to keep it consistent cuz some of them take like an hour, some of
sure.
them take 3 hours, 4 hours. And so we've just agreed like, "Hey, for your income purposes to keep you happy cuz you've made it so easy for us, we just pay her $130 per cleaning no
Okay.
matter how long it takes her." And she's good with that because then she just knows that's what she's going to make. Um, and our cleaning fee for reference is 150.
Okay.
So sometimes the other note I would have on this is if somebody's being really good to you, be good back to them. So for her birthday and stuff, I'll send her a little extra cash or some things of like, "Hey, happy birthday, Merry Christmas, whatever." Just because she's made my life so easy, and that money is easily worth giving to her because it'll make a big difference to her.
Sure.
Um, but within that, because she cares about it, because it's like her street or her neighborhood, like I don't have to worry about how it's being presented because she cares just as much as we do on that presentation. The third thing, and this wasn't huge, um, but it's still like it's the cheapest thing I've done, and it made the biggest difference. So we put in, we have solid core doors through the whole basement.
Okay.
Again, because we spent a little extra on things, I don't need a door that somebody can put a hole through easily just by falling into it. Um, that being said, we have a shower glass that I'm surprised it hasn't broken yet. Like it's stable, but it's just one of those that everybody thought was going to break really quickly, and somehow it's held up. So the on those solid core doors, when I'm talking about that sound vibrating through the house, doors are the biggest culprit of that. A door slamming, even if it's just being closed lightly, the heavier the door is, the more that slam sounds through the house. And so my wife and I had it was about 5-6 months in. It was actually it was right around Christmas. We had just gotten back from Peru from my brother's wedding, and some couple that stayed in the basement decided it was a great time to get married on December 23rd in Colorado when it was negative 20 degrees. So after the wedding, the whole family took off, and just the newlyweds and one of their kids, who was like 2 years old, stayed. Somehow at midnight, this kid just kept closing that door of that master bedroom downstairs again and again. And we didn't know what was happening, because my wife and I would just jerk awake,
Yeah.
and but you wouldn't hear anything. You would just both jerk awake, so we knew something happened, but that was it. Um, and so we'd fall back asleep, and then 10 minutes later, we'd both jerk awake again, and we wouldn't have any clue. So then finally during the day, the next day, we hear the kid slamming the damn door again. We're like, oh, that's what was waking us up last night. So what I did is I went down to the basement, adjusted any of the doors that had shifted a little bit, because in any construction, things will settle a little bit.
Sure. Sure.
Adjusted everything so that it was all straight and wasn't jamming. And then bought those tiny little foam bumpers that you can get at Walmart, at Home Depot, anywhere. They're like $5. And they're just those tiny foam circles. And I put those in the door jamb of each door where it hits up against the actual jamb itself.
Yep.
So for a couple dollars, we barely hear those doors at all anymore. Like you have to slam that door for us to hear it now through the rest of the house. We aren't even aware most of the time that people are down there. Like it
Man,
used to be the doors and that was it. Now we can't even tell.
just the doors were left, and then you
Yeah,
fixed it.
exactly.
I think that the first person who comes up with like a soft closed door, like you do have cabinets, is going to be, I would buy like 20 of those right now. Just you just kind of halfway close the door, and it just like kind of closes like your cabinets do. That would be amazing.
It would
Um,
be.
so those lessons that you learned on this house hack, how are you going to, how are those going to impact or implement those into the rest of your real estate investing, journey from this point forward? Or are any of those lessons transferable?
They're transferable to some extent, yes. I mean, obviously for me as an agent, that's a pretty apparent thing, right? I help so many people do these house hacks, and especially in Colorado, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes don't make that much sense financially when you look at the numbers. And so many people are doing these single family conversions that the lessons from mine have been easily transferable to most of those people. I use mine as an example. Half the reason we built this was because I was answering the same question so often
Sure.
that I was like, why don't I just build it? And then when it's vacant, I can just tell people like, hey, come to my house. I'll show you what we've done, like physically, and I can show
Yeah.
you the differences and things. So I don't have to just explain it to you and say, trust me. Um, and I've had people who aren't even clients of mine come over, right? They're like, hey, I have this question, I have this or whatever. Like I'm open to having people over to my house to show them, even if they're just trying to figure it out. Because I'm trying to make this easier for people, and I want other folks to have pride in the properties that they have too. Um, and as far as it pushing forward, I think the biggest lessons I had, honestly, were just from a construction side of things. Um, just in terms of learning where efficiencies were, what things can be cut down on. Because even with since we've been testing so much in this, the special glue I talked about being between the drywall, it's called green glue, and it is stupidly expensive to put in there. So in our bedroom, we actually did, when I was talking about the carpet glue on the floor,
Yeah.
we did that same drywall on that drywall layering and everything on our walls and our ceiling in our bedroom too.
Oh,
And we actually used carpet glue for that too, because carpet glue stays pliable. That's what it's supposed to do. That was like a quarter of the cost. So like just in lessons like that of like, so now when people are like, oh, I did this, I'm gonna do green glue, and I go, no, 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 carpet glue. It's gonna get everywhere, but it's
Yeah.
gonna save you like hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, depending how big your project is, to do it that way. We're gonna
Yeah,
like
those are
tap out Home Depot and all the carpet glue they have in stock,
yeah.
but
Like, "Sir, why do you need a vat of carpet glue?"
yeah, I think we used like 8 buckets in my bedroom or something like that, like 8 5-gallon buckets.
Oh my gosh, that's a
Yeah,
lot. Holy cow.
yeah,
Um, we're gonna we're gonna, be the only ones buying carpet glue here is gonna be house hackers.
yeah,
Um
exactly. I have considered making a store of just like, here we supply just the things that house hackers always use, and like have just a
I
specialty supply thing.
I mean, that building out that basement unit or building out, a space inside of your house, that's extremely daunting. So, like, these shortcuts that Dan has, it like he suffered through the slamming doors at midnight and the all of the craziness, and so I think that we can all learn a lot from this conversation. So I've got two more questions, Dan. So,
Mhm.
um, let's pay it forward to the squad. What advice would you give someone who is considering house hacking? I know that you do this for a living, for doing this for house hacking, but somebody's talking about house hacking. What advice would you give them to, like, they're considering doing it? What would you say to them?
I would say like truly look at what you're trying to get out of the house. That's the biggest piece. If you're young and you have the ability to move and do things like that, then make some concessions. I think that most people overlook that. They're like, I want to have my first house be awesome, whatever. Most of the people I've worked with, they have 3 4 houses, and you continually will get a better house. The first one's always you're kind of like one, and then your next one's a little bit better, and your next one's a little bit better, and so on and so forth. So just don't overthink the first one. Don't be trying to time the market. Don't do all of that. We have people who have bought anywhere from 2015 who are still buying today, even with the interest rates where they are, because they know the numbers work the way they do it. And really, like, if you have a low budget, you can still make some things work. Even if for some reason you can't buy a house, go find a place where you can be the landlord yourself. Just rent it and be like, I want to go to a landlord and say I want a sublease and I want to rent out other rooms. And then finally, the last piece is, in my opinion, from the things I've seen over the years, 99% of people should not take on a major rehab and a house hack on their first property. Um, the amount of money you will lose on lost rents, other things like that during that rehab process will offset any equity you gained. Um, and so generally, I tell people on your first one, sure, if you want to put new countertops or paint or do carpet, whatever. But doing a full on rehab to turn it into a house hack for most people will actually lose you money, in my opinion, versus take your first one, learn how to be a landlord. Then on your second one, you can add a little more on your project and be like, all right, now I want to do these pieces and like take it in steps. Don't do it all at once. It's a great way to burn yourself out and not want to keep doing it.
Sure. No, I love it. And to your earlier point, check out those opportunity costs of doing it yourself. Everybody says I can save X amount doing it myself, but are you really just holding up that profit starting to come in? Like, it can come in earlier if you just sub it out. And it's you had really good advice on that too. So Dan, is there anything that you want to add or promote? Anything, anywhere where people can reach you, social media, website, whatever you want.
Yep. So easiest thing right now is on Instagram. That's the easiest place to find me most of the time, or obviously in person if you are in Denver for some reason. But it's MREI Agents. It stands for Millennial Real Estate Investor Agents. Trust me, it's not agent crap. Like, we're not putting up stuff there about like, oh, here's the best way to sell your house and here's how to do all this stuff. Like, it's all about whatever projects we got going on and different things there. Again, I'm doing my first personal flip right now. So we're having everything on there, and we'll be sharing the numbers on that. And we share updates on the basement apartments. People can see how those numbers are doing year over year. Just trying to be more useful and putting it up there just to have something out. And so, yeah, keep it pretty straightforward.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely yeah, check him out on Instagram, and uh he has a website out there as well. And definitely get in contact with Dan, especially if you want to follow along with the basement apartment, which I think a lot of it's kind of notorious now in the Denver, at least in the badass arena. Like, everybody knows about Dan's like bulletproof, soundproof, crazy basement, and so yeah, I'm really excited to that you came on and that you shared your really unique house hack story as someone with kids and married and still making it work and still doing it and leading from the front, so to speak. So thanks so much, Dan, and we're so happy to have you on, and thanks for all the things you shared.
Of course, thanks for having me on.
This was the longest episode of the Property Squad yet. I felt like Dan had a lot of really good knowledge when it came to soundproofing, managing cleaners, managing his Verbo, all of that really important stuff. For those of you out there who want to do a basement unit, I think that there's almost no better person to talk to than Dan. Remember that the squad needs you, so leave a comment, leave a like, leave a review, all of that great stuff. We would absolutely love to hear from you. And all of the tools that I use on a daily basis inside of my real estate business are down in the podcast description or the YouTube description. Thank you again so much for tuning in. Check out propertysquadhq.com if you want to sign up for future bonuses. And until next time, check out the next episode. Happy investing.